Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming out to Sustainable Claremont's virtual dialogue here tonight. We've got a great topic and a great speaker, and we're always so thrilled to see you all attend these. We know how we all have Zoom fatigue, and it's one more thing on a Monday night, so we really appreciate your coming. And please know that all of these are recorded and they're on our website and on our YouTube channel. So if you miss it, or if you need to leave early, you can always come back and see what you missed. As we always do, just a few quick announcements before we get started, and then I'll present our speaker. First announcement is that in January, we have another dialogue that's about to be scheduled, probably the second or third week in January, and it's going to be on the Town Avenue Complete Streets project. So really excited for that. We're going to have Maria Tipping and Enrique and Julian Madero from the TTC come speak to us about that project and what lies in store with that. That'll be in our newsletter and on our website. If you're interested in these types of events, please make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter. My colleague Angela is going to put that in the chat box right now, the link to the newsletter. So if you're not already, please sign up for that. Also, we're in the middle of our year-end fundraising campaign. We have a really ambitious goal this year of $15,000, and it costs money to put these types of events on. Just like small businesses, us small community-based organizations and nonprofits are really struggling through this pandemic. So please consider giving. And again, Angela is going to put that into the chat box if you're able. We so appreciate your support. You all are why we're able to continue doing this. And the last thing is that we have a new program here at Sustainable Claremont. It's our Plant a Tree program. It's a great gift idea for that person who you already has everything, or you just can't decide what to get for them. We're going to be planting trees at different locations. Right now, we've lined up a partnership with the YWCA in San Gabriel Valley. And so we're going to be planting trees for them at their women's shelter. And so it's a great cause, and it's a great way to get a gift for somebody you care about this holiday season. Our speaker, Carl Welty, is an amazing speaker, and we're really excited to have him come talk to us tonight. He's going to go ahead and give us a presentation, and then there's going to be time for question and answer at the end. So please, if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and hold on to those. If you just can't wait, go ahead and put it into the chat box, and we'll collect those while the presentation's going on. And either I can ask them to Carl, or if you raise your hand at the end, we'll click on you so that you can unmute yourself and ask Carl yourself. Okay, so let's get to Carl. So Carl is a California licensed architect and principal of Carl Welty Architects. He's been at the forefront of green building and sustainable design for the past 30 years. He received his master's in architecture from Yale and his bachelor's from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. He currently serves as Director of Architecture and Planning of the Banning Ranch Land Trust. It's a tongue twister. His work focuses on affordable energy, efficient design, durable, resilient building systems. He advocates for leveraging natural systems, including solar orientation and climate appropriate principles, to create cost-effective solutions to double energy efficiency of structures with little or no increase in construction costs. His bio goes on and on because Carl's just done so much, but I think we're all better off me just stopping, reading through the bio and letting Carl tell us about himself and tell us about his work. So Carl, I'll throw it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. It's a really pleasure to be here, and I love talking about these things. I think we're at a critical time in our history, and I hope to provide some thoughts and questions to be considered. So I will share screen. Are we working?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, well, we have done that. So what motivates me? As a child, I lived in Turkey from a very young age, because my father was in the Air Force, and I had the pleasure of camping and enjoying the Mediterranean, but also seeing old ruins. But from that experience, I learned a couple of important lessons. One is history is real and it impacts how we choose to live today. And the other lesson is cities and civilizations come and go. We should not assume that progress is always on an upward trajectory. And this, to me, I think is a really critical question today with climate change. And for our children and their children. This is my daughter when she was 5. Getting to more specifics, I think we need to design for the weather of 2050 and not the weather of today. In 2050, Claremont is projected to be 4 degrees warmer than it is now. Claremont will feel like San Bernardino does today. And so we have to think about that. My work focuses on 2 aspects of sustainable design: energy efficient design, cost-effective design with passive solar and climate appropriate design. And also I've looked at and used alternative materials. 20 years ago, I came to the conclusion that we are past peak wood, and we can't replicate those beautiful houses in Claremont that were built 100 years ago with wood. That the wood is just not the same anymore. But that's another talk. Tonight, I'm going to touch on principles of passive solar, ancient history, recent history, review some data from a study I did with an intern from Pitzer College on surface temperatures of an existing building in Claremont, and the beauty of art, the art of passive solar design, and some examples and some conclusions. A few terms: passive solar from the 70s. In the 70s, there was passive and active, and for the purist, they wanted just passive. And in the 70s, if you had a small fan to blow air around your house, that was an active solar system. Pretty low technology by today's standards. Orientation. Orientation is the building's relationship with the sun. The ultimate orientation is due south, but 10 to 15 degrees from true south also works. Thermal mass. Thermal mass is the material, usually a concrete slab, that absorbs and stores heat energy. Heat energy. A building is heated when heat energy accumulated during the day radiates into the building space during the night. And heat energy, the building is cooled when the heat energy is accumulated during the day, absorbed in thermal mass, and later transferred into the cool night air. And I'll talk about this more later, but there's the cooling is why we think it's not just about solar orientation, but the advantages of cooling with natural systems. And I think that's going to be more critical as we move into a warmer climate. A couple of big ideas that I want to put out there for kind of a conversation is, think of the building shell as an energy system, not just an envelope or a box that we put equipment on top of or inside of. This is I think a real critical shifting that I find really interesting. And then also the building shell as an energy storage system, like the building shell as a battery. More on that later. So advantages: cost-effective. Passive solar buildings are typically 50% or more efficient than normal buildings, a little or no increase in construction cost. Passive design strategies reduce cost of energy and maintenance of life of the building. This is really critical. Passive solar buildings continue to provide thermal comfort even when the energy is interrupted. With power shortages and power shutoffs for fire safety, this will become more important in our near future and our present. We can build energy efficient buildings without the need of rare earth metals. And to me, this is an important part of the art. Passive solar buildings connect us to nature and increase our awareness of nature. Consistently perform better. Typical green buildings are 35% better than normal buildings, whereas passive solar buildings are typically 50% better than normal, and many are 70 and 80% better than normal buildings. So a well-designed passive solar building is really 2 or 3 times better than typical LEED buildings. Some questions that people ask: what about existing buildings? There's lots that can be done. What if the site does not have proper orientation? I'm going to show you 2 projects that shows what you can do with a little bit of creativity when the site is not ideal. And passive solar buildings look like they were designed in the 1970s. I don't think that's true, but even if it was, climate change requires us to think about something other than fashion. Questions I like to ask: why are we satisfied with 35% better when solutions? I'm going to move my pictures here. When solutions from the 1970s are 2 and 3 times more efficient without increasing construction costs. Why do we put so much confidence in machines and high technology when there's really beautiful examples in ancient history in the 70s? And why do we ignore the beauty and simplicity of nature and the benefits of working in partnership with nature? Principles of passive solar. And I apologize, I'm going to probably race through a lot of things because we can get to as most questions, but I'm perfectly willing to share this so people can spend more time in the privacy of their own homes. How it works. If only there was some kind of infinite power source that was free to use all day, every day. That's the obvious point. Passive solar works from really simple sort of facts of nature. The sun is lower in the winter and higher in the summer. Nighttime temperature in California is cooler, 25 to 30 degrees cooler than the daytime. And there's always a reliable prevailing breeze for natural ventilation and summer cooling. It's really very simple. And if one just sort of pauses and thinks about it as part of nature, these simple things can be leveraged into making very efficient buildings. I think we probably all understand this a bit, but the reason why the sun is lower in the winter because of the tilt of the earth. We all. Starting off with the first rule is orienting buildings long direction east-west. This is a plan for a visitor and cultural center for a project that we've been working on. And beyond the building, we can think about using landscape to shade buildings or manage the microclimate outside of a building. Maybe lots of us have seen diagrams like this where we show the summer sun angle and the winter sun angle or sun angles. This are 2 slides where this is showing how, like, why a building oriented due south is better than not due south. So this, if you see the little plan on top, so a due south building is not only easier to get the sun in, but it's also easier to shade it. So the same building, if it was oriented 45 degrees to the east, the early morning sun, the sun would come into the building at 8 o'clock, and because that sun angle is so low, there would be a lot more direct solar gain, heat gain, than for a building, this little bit of area here, a building oriented to true south. So the building shell is an energy system. The idea is just we start with the stuff that's already in the building: windows and concrete slabs and roof overhangs and walls and roofs, and just think of those as not just the thing that makes the shell or the design, but you think of those in an integrated way to make a building more energy efficient. And you're going to pay for those anyways. And so the idea is you use those in the right way to leverage the most efficient, the most energy efficient design using these materials that are often not considered as part of an energy system. More diagrams. This is just to show that you can, with the design of the building, design it so that direct sunlight and heat comes into rooms that are on the north side of the building, such as the classroom. So the winter sun comes in, the summer sun doesn't come in. You use north light for ambient lighting and a natural light without heat gain. In the building, and I'll show this in more detail, but the building is designed so there's a few places in the building where there's an eyebrow for a clear story that facing north to bring natural light into the exhibit hall. So this strategy, and I'll explain more, but this combination of the south-facing glass and the north-facing glass, the exhibit hall would require very little artificial lighting for lighting. Passive solar buildings can reduce the need for off-site energy. And now I'm going to start talking about today versus the 70s. Today, typical on-site energy generation, 2020, solar panels, windmills, even kind of silly machines that try to combine windmills and solar panels. On-site energy generation, 1973. This is in the 70s, because we didn't have such high technology, we designed buildings using water and glass and other materials to make the building efficient. So I think of that building as an energy system. Typical heating and cooling machines and equipment. HVAC systems for passive solar buildings are typically 1/5 the size. The smaller equipment has multiple advantages: lower costs, lower replacement cost over the life of the building, reduce energy consumption. HVAC systems typically account for 15% of the embodied carbon in a normal building. So if a building if the mechanical system is smaller or even not even required, you not only save the carbon and the cost of that system, but you save that 4 or 5 times over the life of a building. Passive solar buildings require less photovoltaic panels. And I'll talk about this more, but fewer solar panels, fewer less high technology will allow us to reduce our need for rare metals and other toxic issues with batteries. Solar-oriented and climate-appropriate design in ancient history. Ancient history is filled with lessons about how to build great cities without our modern energy grid. Wind catchers are wind cooling devices. There's some evidence that these might have been used in ancient Egypt 3,000, 4,000 years ago. This is just a drawing from an Egyptian wall carving. Always nice to quote Socrates, or maybe even learn that Socrates was maybe an early passive solar architect. But so Socrates thought that houses with proper solar orientation and porticos was a better house. The plan on the left is the city of Priene, which is now in modern Turkey. It was the first Greek city built on a grid, and as you can see, the grid was oriented south. Now I'm going to race through this. There's courtyard housing is really common throughout the Mediterranean, and I think it's really an important lesson for California because we have a very similar climate. The courtyard from Pompeii, Egypt, Spain. These are all more beautiful than that. Africa, India. So the point is that there's plenty of evidence that these things work, and these worked when civilizations and cultures didn't have our modern energy grid. And I think that that's an important clue for us as we enter into the very uncertain future when energy needs to be preserved and may not be so reliable. Other examples: the Native American cliff dwellings. They use the cliffs, the face of the cliff above, for shading. Persian wind cooling towers, until my research for this document, were my favorite. Now I have kind of a new favorite, but these Persian wind cooling towers, they sort of speak for themselves. They're extraordinarily beautiful, and the function is very clear. The way that the way they work, they capture wind from the prevailing wind, the wind direction, channel it through the building. Oftentimes, sometimes the air is routed through an underground tunnel, brought in through the building. My new favorite. I sometimes architects talk about, solar orientation, the buildings are, they look like from the 70s. It's all, there's something modern about it. I'm really excited about these things because they're just really, really cool. And there's such potential for great modern design creatively applied. Just great pictures of these cities that were just covered with these wind catchers. I have to say that I want to learn more about them, but because it could be capturing the wind, but it also might be working as a wind foil that helps draw the air out. But I think these are capturing wind. This is a pausing for my religious moments here. This is a picture that I saw when I was in college. That I always think about as when I think about good design with the sun and capturing the sun. This is an octagon room, part of Nero's palace, built in '68. One has to admit that that's a compelling picture. So it's a really beautifully simple, it's an octagon. There's 4 rooms that each during each time of the day, that light effect would occur at, like, for example, it's also oriented exactly correct. When I saw that picture, I had already had my passive solar class. And when I saw that picture, I immediately went to the plan to see that it was designed correct. So in the morning, light would come here, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, late afternoon. So it's the industrial age, or maybe the 1990s also. We sometimes miss the forest. Recent history of passive solar. A professor I had in college, who I'm now starting to work with, Ken Haggard, he received money from the state and the federal government for the research, to do research on how to build energy efficient buildings, he and others. And there was great work, great solutions discovered and demonstrated. But in the 90s, we lost that. So I'm a real advocate for trying to recapture that knowledge, because we can provide more efficient buildings, more cost-effective, and more resilient buildings. The context. Passive solar, the research in passive solar was motivated by the oil embargoes and the oil crisis. But some smart architects were even thinking about solar orientation before the 70s. This is a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1948. You can see that it's oriented and much like other sort of buildings, curved to collect the sunlight through the day. This is a roof pond house designed by Ken Haggard in 1973. Built in 1973. This house provided all the thermal comfort, all the heating and cooling in 1973 without any energy input from the grid. It's completely possible. And Ken Haggard continues to do extraordinary buildings, which we'll talk more about. This is a design that he created for a state office building that would have provided 100% of the heating and cooling in 1976, but the state thought that it wasn't noble or hierarchical enough, so it wasn't built. Another important person who did some work in the 70s and 80s was Ralph Knowles from USC. Ralph Knowles there's just a great body of knowledge and research, but he really looked at urban forms and building cities in a way that provided direct sunlight. Ralph Knowles also did some really interesting research on Native American pueblos. This is one example of the Chaco Canyon Pueblo with proper or optimal solar orientation. In the 70s, 2 home developments in California that incorporated these ideas, the Village Homes in Davis and Meadowood in Claremont. I just think of what about all the millions of homes that have been built who turned their back on these ideas. So what happened to the research from the 70s and 80s? The political stability in the Middle East created cheap oil, increased interest in PV energy systems and other complex technologies. The simplicity of passive solar design creates fewer marketable products and specialized services. I love this cartoon with a solar powered tanning salon. I think it represents our interest in high technology. Well, I'm going to start racing through this. So we did some research on measuring the temperature of the Benton Museum. We checked, we measured the surface temperature on concrete walls, glass, metal doors, the wood every hour from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So some of the results, hourly average, what we find is that the hourly average on the south side is less, typically 10 degrees less on each material than the east side and west side. This is because the afternoon, the noontime and afternoon sun, the sun angle is so high that a lot of heat energy is reflected off the surfaces, where late afternoon, morning sun and late morning, the sun setting, more energy is absorbed into the walls. So the daily high surfaces, this is quite extraordinary. The east elevation glass was 145 degrees. The south elevation glass never went above 110 degrees. This is a surprise, and I'll talk more about the dark wood stain on the east was 155 degrees. A summer and winter comparison, what we see is that at 2 o'clock in the summer versus the winter, even though it's 30 degrees cooler in the winter, the building temperature still warms up. So in the winter, because the sun is so much lower, more energy is absorbed into the wall. Thus explains why the temperatures are greater or higher, even though it's 30 degrees cooler outside. A couple of surprising observations, even on the light shade from a small tree cooled the temperature on the concrete. So the temperature here might be 6 degrees cooler than the temperature there. It was really quite a dramatic difference. The possible lesson is how effective shading from trees could be on buildings. Concrete pin. This is another, this is a surprise that the wood elements, it was staying dark, got very hot. And that, just as a side note, a lesson, at least for me, would be that dark stained wood collects a lot of heat energy, and I think would diminish the life expectancy of the wood. Some of the other really interesting research from Ralph Knowles is he found that the thickness in some of the adobes were adjusted for which direction the walls were facing, which is partly inspired why I did the research, or why it's important for us to understand how materials are affected by which direction they're facing. So this is, I'm just going to talk about for me, what I've learned is that the same decisions you make to make a building more energy efficient makes the building connect to nature. A simple passive solar house in Santa Monica, that the street is 45 degrees, so we have to do this sort of odd design, but you necessarily have to have a garden outside the space. This is a small project, an ADU I designed a couple of years ago, and again, creating a primary wall facing south, which is not parallel to the property line, but it created an opportunity for sun to come in and necessarily an outdoor garden space. So you see the little three-dimensional drawing and the building built. So, so that wall of glass, you'll see it in a few more slides, how that enables light to come in. Well, this slide. So because of the high glass and the space, there's a double height space inside, the sun comes, enters into far north of the building in the winter, but can be shaded in the summer. The Chino Basin Water Conservation District, many lessons here, but as we thought about how the sun moves, the tower, the wind cooling tower, with some windows on the top and then other windows, it captures the last light of the day in creating really marking the change of the time. The visitor center for our Banning Ranch. This is the building, the visitor center facing south. So the design to bring in the sunlight into the windows, it also opens out to nature. Back to my Nero's gold room. So this is where you can see the four niches that capture light and heat in times of the day. To me, it's important that the north niche opens to the rest of the palace, and then the light wouldn't come through, wouldn't have the same effect because the afternoon light or the noontime light the sun is too high, so it wouldn't have that effect. So I'm just going to race through some projects. So this is the Chino Basin project, which is in Montclair. I think a really interesting project that's, once COVID is over, it's open to the public. Without much effort and just thinking about the building envelope and natural light, we're able to achieve our Title 24 compliance report with 60% over baseline. 30% and above is 30% is considered above average. The passive solar home built in Santa Monica, with I explained earlier, it's a little different, but this building achieved LEED Platinum, but it was 75% over the baseline for the Title 24 compliance report, which was 25% higher than what our LEED rater had ever seen before. Some images and drawings of the ADU I designed. So you can see with the double height space, the light comes in. This project was 40% over the baseline. So the lesson here is, building that wall to orient to the south created a space outside, and also regardless of what is built in the next property, the light will always be available. This is the Temple Beth David in San Luis Obispo, designed by Ken Haggard, who has built 200, 300 buildings. He really has much to teach us. This building is 80% more efficient than a normal building, 30%. Actually, maybe I missed. Its carbon footprint of greenhouse gas emissions is 30% of a normal building. It actually costs less than a normal building. And this is really extraordinary. I want to say this very slow. He's so knowledgeable. He was able to build this without an air conditioning system. So there's no mechanical cooling system, which many people think about passive buildings is that, if you're not going to have an air conditioning system, then you're going to suffer. It'll be a little bit warmer than normal. But he actually, and he has documents this, that it actually is, he keeps it cooler than a normal building with conventional mechanical system. This is really, really extraordinary. And this is a building, San Luis Obispo has the similar climate to, say, downtown Los Angeles. Not as hot as San Bernardino, but it's not on the beach. This is truly, truly amazing. Before COVID, we started a conversation with some people at TBI to do some remodeling of the building, and we all agreed that it would be great to bring natural light into the building. And thinking about wind catchers and Ken Haggard with his synagogue, I thought that we could design light scoops to bring in natural light, but also would do double duty to help bring in cool air at night to help cool the building. The existing buildings, the walls are on insulated concrete, but by wrapping the building with a second insulated skin, that would make a lot of sense just to be more energy efficient. But if we do that, then the concrete wall becomes a really extraordinarily and completely, a really sufficient thermal mass for cooling. And we also can rely on, in addition to just prevailing wind and the night temperature is cooler, there's also this natural occurring mountain, a breeze that comes down from the mountains. So this is sort of a section of what it might look like. So this cool air comes in from the north, drawn out to the south. Ken Haggard, who I think he knows what he's talking about, thinks that by doing this, we could reduce the heat, the energy requirement for cooling by 90%. This is, I sort of giddy about the potential for this. Also, to note, I think with global warming, our need for energy for summer cooling is much more critical than summer heating or winter heating. Quick examples: I think atriums and courtyards has a lot of potential for being part of a new building for heating and cooling. This is described as the smartest office building in the world. It's in Amsterdam. What's the same principles? There's a large atrium, beautiful space. It's orange and north, and the skin is designed to reflect heat and vent the building. Quickly running through our Banning Ranch project. The project is a 380 acres of native habitat to be restored in a 10-acre park. That will have a research and education facilities, consisting of 4 buildings. Most of the buildings face south and are open up to the landscape. Revisiting this building, so the south facing of the building, the north facing of the building. So this is the example. So the south facing glass is here, but the way the roof works is that the winter sun will come into the rooms on the north side of the building, and on the north side of the building we have 3 small eyebrows that bring northern light into the main space. The entrance tower is inspired by the quicha that were built by the Native Americans who lived on the site for 12,000 years. That's a whole other story about environmental justice that we'd love to talk about another time. But reform into a modern building entrance and wind cooling tower. So the future, how am I doing on time? So the need for building better. To the question of what about new buildings? I mean, it's only good for new buildings. Well, we need a lot of new buildings. We're projected to need a new New York City every month for the next 40 years. So there's plenty of opportunity to build new buildings that are more energy efficient with reduced carbon. From 2015, the heating and cooling load, water heating about 50%. Buildings during the next 25 years, the government agency thinks that we're projecting that we will increase our efficiency by 40% or less per year, 0.4%. I just ask, why is 0.4% less per year good enough when there are solutions that can reduce energy consumption by 50% now? On the other side, we're torn, or we're drawn to high technology. And I love this picture. I hope you can see it. Is that, people are marketing machines that we're going to put inside our house and designed in a way to be attractive. But I think it's more, we can build better, more efficient buildings if we think of the building shell as an energy system. And I'm getting to the conclusion here. The building shell is an energy system. So it's using roofs, the roof line, putting the glass in the right place, providing thermal mass. And there are alternatives to thermal mass other than concrete that have a lower carbon footprint, but that's another story. So it's just thinking about the parts of the building that we are going to build anyways, and just putting them in the right, just shaping them the right way to make the building, to turn the building into an energy system. The building as a battery or an extension of the energy grid. I think I'd like to think about the potential for storing that heat energy and the thermal mass as like a battery. So this is extraordinarily important in not so much in Claremont, but in a larger city. When we air condition our buildings, that heat energy doesn't just disappear; it gets projected out into the hot afternoon sun, which requires more energy to push it out into the building. So, but if we think about this building as a battery or energy storage, we can store the heat in the foundation or the concrete or the thermal mass through the day and expel it out into the night air when it's where the air temperature is cooler. Just shifting that expelling of energy from the daytime to the nighttime becomes more efficient and reduces the heat island effect. So climate change requires us to find new solutions to build more energy efficient and more resilient communities. Advanced technologies have their place, but ancient civilizations that built great cities without our modern energy grid and creative engineering from the 70s that solved many of the problems that endure today can provide solutions that are more efficient, more robust, and more cost effective than many of the cutting edge technology marketed today. And thank you.
Great, Carl. Thank you so much for that. So much in there. I feel like I need like 3 hours of this to wrap my head around everything. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions here just so we could maximize what we have left of our time. And I had a question written down. I like to take the question since I've got the mic right now. But Vanita Pugal from Design Nodal, and who's also on our board, she asked a very similar question. And so that question is just, I think you have us convinced about the promise of, this type of design and looking forward how this needs to be, how we look at new buildings moving into the future and, even for the past. So why aren't designers and architects doing this? Is it, a problem of education for architects and designers? Was it not demand? I know you had mentioned, late in the, late 70s, early 80s, with energy prices, but it seems like this is now, an issue that people are well aware of, and people want lower energy bills and people want solar. So do you see an opportunity now, or what do you see as the major hurdles facing us to affect change for this?
I do see it as an extraordinary opportunity, and I'm getting better at marketing every day. But the real point is, I think that I'm old enough to have gone to school in the 70s in California, and I had a class in Passive Solar in 1979 from Ken Haggard and exposed to these ideas. But it really was in the mid 80s to the early 90s with cheap oil. It wasn't an interest, and government funding. My class in 1979 with Ken Haggard, our textbook was a manual. He was contracted by the state of California to write. So the federal government and the state government were paying people like Ken Haggard to do this research, and we just lost that interest. So that's part of it. The other part is that with cheap oil and more newer technologies, I think this part of our makeup where we're drawn to the shiny new object or to advanced technology, and there's a place for that, but you have to be really careful about appropriate technology. So I think we've in the last 20 years or so, we've been drawn to looking for more complex solutions. And whatever that gap in the 90s, and we lost track of what happened, what was being done in the 70s. I mean, that's my best guess, and like why that's so. So I think that's my thinking.
Okay.
And also, there's the passive solar home or passive solar building. It's so simple, and there's no money. There's nothing to market.
Hmm. Right.
And not to be cynical, but I think that's part of it. We're bombarded with Tesla and all these machines, and there's not a lot of shiny objects to market in a good passive solar or climate appropriate design. Simplicity is not marketable.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're working on the marketing every day then. This is good news. For the rest of you who are attending right now, if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. But there's another question here in the chat box. I'll just go ahead and read that. This is from Ethan Resnick, and it's, how should geothermal heating and cooling factor into the future energy use in buildings? If you could speak to that, Carl.
Great question. I think geothermal is another natural system that is used in the right time. It can be used, and it's used very effectively. In general, I think that it's more cost effective in colder climates, but there's some other variants of using the cool earth for cooling. That doesn't require drilling such deep holes. But anyway, so that absolutely, there's a place for that.
Okay, do we have any more questions from, I don't see any hands up. I'll ask one. Oh, Freeman, there we go.
Yeah, on geothermal, I understand that the best way to construct it is piping underground, 100-foot long stretches, 20 feet apart, that sort of thing. What about before you build a house, put a slab down, just put that kind of piping under the slab, and then you've got the space for it, and seems like a really natural thing to do. Of course, it's not cheap putting geothermal systems in, but it seems to me that the overall advantage would be quite good.
Again, I think it's gosh, there's so many. So to use, for this Banning Ranch project, I reached out to Ken Haggard to bring him in as a consultant to teach us, and I thought I would have a lot to learn, and I was not disappointed. But to use his project, his synagogue in San Obispo as an example, I mean, you can't get any better than that. And it's a straw bale building. It's sort of a similar climate, and just using shading glass, reducing the heat load in the summer, and nighttime cooling, it's enough in this climate. But Freeman, also there was a design for a passive solar home from the 70s that I thought was really clever, and I actually started to use it for a friend of mine, but it was not built. It's a very smart solution. It's similar to what you're talking about. What he used, the idea was to use standard concrete blocks and turn them on their side, pouring a concrete slab on top of that. And so the concrete blocks, you can run air through the concrete block holes. And so that's, I think, similar to what you're talking about. And there's also, there's people who, in California, this, again, it's in this mild climate, we don't have to do very much to be extraordinarily efficient and better. But you could also, put pipes underground that are, and if it's at least 5 feet, 5 feet below the surface, the temperature is very constant. And so it's another way to do what you're talking about. You pipes underground and bring air in from the source, run it through the ground and bring it up to the house for cool air.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I have a question from Elise, and then Dorothy's had her hand up, and then we'll work our way down the chat box. So a question here from Elise: does it seem feasible to retrofit existing homes to take advantage of the features you've mentioned? Or a lot of this sounds like it has to be designed initially, but what about retrofitting?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to include those the conceptual diagram for the TBI. I like in my question, what about existing buildings? Things can always be done, and particularly because oftentimes people talk about with retrofitting, how can you retrofit a building to be a passive solar if you don't have the orientation? This is why I really want to talk about. I talk about passive solar or climate appropriate, because passive solar makes us think of only as heating and just the sun, but there's this whole other half to it, and maybe more than half, for using ventilation for nighttime cooling. And I think that's a really easy for existing buildings. And plus, and as I said, I think I'm going to try to say earlier, is that and I think this is an enormous potential for office buildings. You can plant trees, and I think of it as an integrated landscape strategies for increasing the energy performance of buildings. But with this, I think there's a lot of things you can do for an existing buildings.
Great. And then Dorothy, you're up next. Let me ask you to unmute yourself.
Got it.
There you go.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm an anthropologist, so I especially loved the view of the ancient people's construction ideas and the historical view that you also gave us. I've been to some of those places that were hundreds of years old and was very, very impressed with the temperature inside and the wisdom of the design. I think a couple of things that those people had were in the nature of values that we could use today. One of them being, don't despoil the land, and the other one being, don't waste and make wise use of the resources that are available. But of course, I'm more interested in the cultural and human behavioral aspects of these issues than the engineering ones. But I still think that we have those values in us, and that if given the choice, people would make the right one. But something has taken the choice away from us. And I mean, the obvious answer is that big corporations have gotten too much power, and other political interests have gotten too much power. But it just seems to me that your marketing ideas and many other presentations that I have seen or know about that have convinced me that we can do this kind of effort, but we just need to up the scale of it and improve our game educationally speaking. So you seem like you're optimistic about how much we can do to alleviate the effects of climate change in the not so distant future. Am I right about that?
Sometimes. I think. Thank you for the note about the design for the Banning Ranch project. Even it's a project that is years in the making. We've been working on it for 3 years, but even before working on that, I had come to the conclusion that this is about values, that we have much to learn from indigenous people, and particularly to learn how to think of ourselves as part of nature, not separate. And I think that this may be part of this inclination to technology and machines. but I think there's been too many cultural forces from Europe that separate us from nature. And if you want to talk about it another time, I'll tell you it started in 1413, but that's another story. But so they've been working with the Native American and the people from the Hashiman. It just made it's become more clear about how important those values are. And one thing we're hopeful about this project, the Banning Ranch project, is to be a model for not only restoring native habitat to pre-development standards, but to tell the story of how did these people live on that site for 12,000 years in harmony when we screwed it up in 270 years. So the history of that land, that site, is those people lived on that site. There was a village there. They were relocated in 1770s, became a cattle ranch, which started to degrade the native habitat. It was a cattle ranch until 1943 when it became an oil field. So the story of that site is the story of Western European colonialism and environmental injustice. And so very much what we want to say with that project is what you're talking about is capturing those values, designing to demonstrate not just as symbols, but how the building functions. So I think with passive solar or climate appropriate design, there's really simple solutions to design in harmony with nature to capture that lesson.
Great, thank you for that, Carl. We're coming to the end here. We have so many questions, so I apologize to all of you whose questions we don't get to, but we will be sure to pass those along to Carl and have those as a follow-up in our email that'll come out in a couple days. I think we could do one more, maybe, Carl, if that works for you. Okay.
I love this stuff. I can talk about it forever.
Yeah, no, this is good. We'll get you back, because I know we talked about multiple types of topics anyway. Michael, you were up next, but I think we've sort of spoke to the question that you've come up with, and how this is a problem because of the simplicity and the need for marketing and doing the education and outreach. So I'm going to touch on the next one here by Carolyn West. Thank you for asking this. This is an important one, and I think one that Michael was going to talk about in a perhaps separate dialogue. Could decline in unlimited amount of cheap timber cause increased interest in alternative construction? So this would include tornado, hurricane, earthquake. So could decline in unlimited amount of cheap timber cause increased interest in alternative construction? Oh, sorry, we had like a copy paste job there twice, so I repeated myself. So the basic question there is, once timber is no longer cost effective, what's next? What's the alternative? How do we move past that?
Well, this could be I would love to talk about timber and steel and alternative building materials. For me, my lesson in timber wood came 20 years ago when I was told by a client that their exterminator advised them to tent their house as soon as it was done. And I thought, well, that's crazy, it's new wood. But they told my client that the new wood is bringing termites into the house. But since then, I've learned many lessons, and I've looked at this question. The wood, those beautiful craftsman homes in Claremont built 100 years ago, they're all built with old growth wood. The wood we have today that's you buy is grown very fast. It's not as strong. It's less stable. It's not going to even protected. It won't last, I don't think, 75 years. I think that there's alternative materials. For me right now, the front runner it's called cold form steel or light gauge steel. It's really an open source. It's not proprietary. On the one side, on the other side with wood, the question of cheap timber because of fires and bark beetle. Yeah, but I don't know if it's good quality. I think there's some real promise with other technologies. Gosh, there's so much to say about that. There's a real interest right now. I just think that I don't know if there is any cheap timber. I don't think wood is the right way to build durable, fire-resistant structures anymore. And there's a lot to be said about that. I think we're past wood. And there are some really, I think there's really cost-effective solutions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Carl. So much more to learn from what you have to offer us. And I hope you'd be willing to come back and speak to us again. I feel like we have a lot of great questions. I went ahead and copied all the questions. I'll be sure to send those to Carl. And this recording, it usually takes us a day or two for Zoom to send it to us and for us to get it on our website. But we'll be sure to send the recording to all of you and the questions, and hopefully have Carl back for another dialogue in the near future. And so thank you all so much. Oh, Freeman's got his hand up.
I just want to get a sense of the audience. Our sustainability dialogues used to be scheduled for an hour and a half. And it seems to me that an hour compresses things quite a bit. I'd like to get people's sense if you would like to have the dialogues a little bit longer on these Zoom meetings, or if hour is better.
Yeah, so that a good way to do that maybe is to respond to our emails to later this week, and let us know your preference. We do these for the public, and so we all know that 60 minutes can be hard, or 90 minutes or 2 hours can be hard over the internet. But please let us know, and we can adjust accordingly. So again, thank you all so much for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you after the new year. So everyone have a great holiday.
I have one more. Just
okay.
Are the chats? Can I be able to respond to the chats afterwards, or how does it? I don't.
That'll depend on how Richard's Zoom is set up. Dick, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
I think we can definitely send you the questions, and we'll have a contact, an email contact that is associated with the name that submitted those. So yes, I think, Carl, we can give you a name and a question and a contact to respond to.
And if I could just one last question, and I've been kind of in my head, the sociologist who asked that question, I'd love to follow up the question or my comment about 1413 and the moment of separation in European culture of us and nature. I have some thoughts about that I sort of would love to extend or continue that conversation. It's an interesting historic question, but I think it's actually a really critical question in sustainability.
How about if I, Carl, how about if I put my email, if you're talking to me, I'm an anthropologist.
Yeah. Anthropologist, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. You want my email?
Sure. Are you?
Cal Poly.
Should I write it down, or you? I think you can get
I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Copy real quick, and then we can close.
Yeah, or I could copy and paste the whole chat box to you, Carl, if that's easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just sent it to Carl.
All right.
You have my. I'll tell you what happened in 1413.
Great.
Yeah, got us all wondering.
Yeah, this is a whole dialogue in and of itself. All righty. Well, thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.